So now I'll move on to introducing our speaker for this evening, our president of the society, Dr. Laurie Bergner. Laurie is a clinical psychologist in private practice with a specialty in couples counseling. She received her Ph.D. from the University of Colorado under Dr. Peter Ossorio and is a longtime member of the society. Laurie is known for her travel to exotic places where she has the opportunity to do photography while learning about other cultures. She's also a very active member of her community in Illinois, volunteering for the League of Women Voters and the Immigration Project, which gives legal help to immigrants. So with nothing further, I will yield the floor to Laurie for her presidential address.
Great. Well, I'm delighted to be here and to see all of you. And this is a topic I have really enjoyed working on since I do so much marital therapy. It gave me an opportunity to really think even more about it. But before I get started, I want to thank a couple of people. I want to thank Dr. Ralph Wexler, who spent some time with me one delightful morning in Denver, talking about this. And I want to also especially thank my husband, Dr. Ray Bergner, who spent tons of time, because we had tons of time, and he's wonderful at helping, and he's been just extremely helpful. And I want to mention for new members or non-members that this is really a huge benefit that you get from being part of this community, which is that we really do have mentors, lots of mentors that are wonderful, and you can get help with presentations and help with cases and things. They are really available and they're always incredibly helpful. I also want to mention that I will be making reference to some clients, and that's based on my practice. But I want to let you know that all of the examples I use are either a combination of a number of people, so they're not any particular person, or in specific cases, not only did I disguise their names and some other information, but I also got some explicit permission from them to use their cases here. So over time, I've begun to see marital issues as having their real roots in what I call poor fit, not necessarily blaming one or the other or someone doing something wrong, which is what we often might look for or look at, but instead that many issues are baked into the kind of people that people are right from the start, just the kind of people they are. So I found it really useful to see things from this perspective and to help the couples see these things from this perspective. Hold on, I have to turn this off. I thought I had gotten stopped. Okay. Love that clock, but it does sometimes interfere for things. I'm going to share my screen a little bit here. I want to go to slideshow. Oh, I think I know where I am. There we go. Okay, and if you have people in the way, by the way, on the right-hand side, you have a strip because you're still on gallery view or whatever, you can click on the top there and get rid of some of that. Okay, so my title, Cinderella's Slipper, Exploring the Concept of Fit in Couple Relationships. So I want to highlight a couple of things about this title. First, the word exploring, and this really is exploring a concept to see what you all think about it and get some feedback. And I will stop a couple of times for some Q&A during the presentation to see if there's some things that you want to talk about briefly and then move on because it is kind of long. And then I want to mention Cinderella's slipper. So this came to me as I was thinking about fit, and I thought there was a perfect connection here with the fit of her foot into a slipper and the fit that we look for in relationships. So she did find her prince, and there's this analogy of the foot fitting perfectly, as well as a wonderful pun by Hap Cox that she found her soulmate. I love. So I have a question for you to ponder. Let's see here. Oops. Why is this not going? Oh dear. I don't know why this is not. Oh, maybe here. Aha. Okay. So if the slippers were such a perfect fit, why did one come off? I don't want you to answer this because we will get back to this at the end of the presentation. But there's a great question, right? In fact, I found somebody asked this on the net and there were some interesting answers like, when you exercise, you sweat. But that's not the kind of answer that I'm looking for here. So when writing this, I was reminded of some old theorists that we studied in graduate school, Lederer and Jackson, the Mirage of Marriage book, in which they talk about 4 different kinds of couples. And the 4th one he called the heavenly twins. Now, of course, I've never seen that couple, they said, but theoretically there is such a thing. So that's what everyone wants, right? They want a soulmate, a heavenly twin. So what do they get? You told me you'd spend your whole life trying to make me happy. I didn't expect to live this long. And here's another that I actually have had some couples tell me when they come in, do you realize this is the only thing we ever do together anymore as they go into marriage counseling? Humor tells you a lot about topics and about how people think about marriage. So let me read you a couple of things I found. Love is blind, but marriage is an eye-opener. Then there was a man who said, I never knew what real happiness was until I got married, and then it was too late. A young son says to his father, is it true, Dad? I heard that in some parts of Africa, a man doesn't know his wife until he marries her. Dad says, that happens in most countries, son. And finally, 5 secrets to romantic happiness for a man. Number 1, it's important to find a woman who is good at household chores, cooks well, and takes care of the kids. Number 2, it's important to find a woman whom you can bring out for social functions. Number 3, it's important that she shares the same life goals and common vision as you. Number 4, it's important to find a woman who is good in bed. Number 5, it's important that these women never meet. So jokes tell us some underlying assumptions here. Let's see if I can give you just stop screen. Well, no, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Okay. Oops. Okay, that's not what I want. But we'll get to that. Okay. It tells us really that it's really hard. Relationships are really hard, and there's a lot of losses, there's a lot of disappointments, a lot of struggles, as well as hopefully a lot of joy and happiness in relationships. And obviously, though, some are more successful than others. So how does fit help us understand this, and how do people think about fit? When you ask people about fit, what are people looking for? They often think first of the same interests. Having the same interests is actually really, really nice. But I find that many couples actually don't have many similar interests, and yet they have some pretty satisfying relationships nonetheless. So that leads to the questions I'm going to explore in this presentation. First of all, what is good fit? What are some major components of good fit? How do couples compensate for lack of fit? A distinction between fit, satisfaction, and commitment. Why does initial good fit sometimes change over time? A question that has come up, was fascinating to think some about. And finally, how is the concept of fit helpful in clinical work with couples? So let's start with the definition of fit. What is fit? And the answer is, there is no good definition of fit. this is true actually of a lot of things. So I researched the definition, I looked it up on the dictionary and found it was impossible to find a definition, really. In fact, they really don't come up with a definition, they come up with examples. So it's one of those things that you know it when you see it. And I think you can think of couples that you know and you'd say, oh, they are such a good fit, or couples that are not such a good fit. And you're saying, I can't understand how they ever got together or keeps them together. So good fit often means matching things that are important to that individual and that couple, which is kind of tricky because it can change over time and it can even change with different people. So for example, if political values are super important to one person, a good match might be finding someone with the same political values and the same interests. But if it's not very important to that person, then the other person's political values might not matter very much at all to that person. So this entails weight and value, which we're going to get back to a little bit later. And I'm also going to draw a distinction here between fit, satisfaction, and commitment. They're all different, but they're all connected. So let's start with the definition, the dictionary definition. A lot of examples, in fact, most of the examples I found, interestingly enough, were for work, for hiring employees. So here's some examples. And again, these are examples rather than the definition. I hope that this company wants employees who are conscientious and committed. That's why I feel I would be a good fit here. Or we need people with get up and go. That's why I think Larry would be a good fit for the project team. Or I'm sorry to be letting you go, but I just don't think you're the right fit for this job. And finally, they ask people about the importance of fit when they're looking for employees. And here's one answer. To be honest, fit for me is often more crucial than the skills part. I would rather hire someone who I believe is capable of the job, but may need a little training and is an excellent fit, than someone who's capable of the job without training, but a very poor fit. So there's one relationship one only that I found as I looked through, and this was it. I think the first nanny we spoke to would be a good fit for our family. She seems really responsible and the children like her. So no one thing actually defines fit at all. So let me, somehow I did that. Okay, let me get into some Pete-isms from Dr. Peter Ossorio, our mentor. Many, many years ago, I was talking with him about some of these issues, and he said a couple of different things at different times that I never forgot. He said, you know, when you're buying a house, they say in real estate, there's only three things that are important: location, location, and location. With couples, there's only three things that are important: selection, selection, and selection. So here's what I take that to mean. When you have good fit, the right fit, issues will arise, as they always do with every couple, but they will be less serious, perhaps, and more workable. And conversely, with the wrong fit, it can be a struggle. People who are who they are, and they don't usually change in very major ways. So if the problem is their bad fit to start, then there's going to be a limit to how good that relationship actually can be. So knowing that no couple has perfect fit, this is an exploration of how to understand how different aspects of the relationship will result in fit that works well or doesn't, and how people deal with or compensate for the different types of lack of fit, since there's always some lack of fit. And are there differences, some differences, that actually are good to have? So it's an interesting thing. Almost everyone says they couldn't possibly be married to someone who is just like them. We know that opposites or complements attract. But then those same differences cause problems. People are aggravated by the same differences that they initially chose the person for. So Dr. Rich Driscoll once said, we choose people because they're different than we are, but then we spend the rest of our lives wishing they were just like we are. So good fit isn't actually similarity in everything, and it's not differences. So it's an interesting question, how to understand good differences versus problematic differences. So that leads us to a somewhat perhaps cryptic comment by Pete, in which I once said, was talking to him about this and how differences attract, and yet they can be a problem. And he said, yes, but what differences? So some differences work well and some do not. So it's not only what differences, but how people interact with them that seem to matter. So there's a concept of synergy. Basically, people working together well create something better than either one of them could alone by themselves. So better together than each separately. And complements attract. We can think about it that way. They're supposed to work that way, each filling in for the other's lack, weaknesses, lack of ability, lack of interests even. But often differences over time become seen as deficits or defects in the other person. And then the couple is working against each other rather than trying to work together and having effective teamwork and improving the relationship. So often people lose appreciation for the very differences they initially picked that partner for, which we'll talk more about later. So back to the definition. So when there's no way to define a concept, in descriptive, we use what's called a paradigm case formulation. So it's another way to capture what it is we're talking about. It's a description where we say, if there was ever a case of whatever, this is it. Anyone looking at this would think this is it. So in this case, it's fit. So it takes the place of a definition. So here I'm going to present a couple that has great fit, and I think we'd all say so. So as I describe this paradigm case, look for some different types of fit that this involves. So this is Liz and Scott, happens to be a couple I know very well. Liz and Scott have the same religion and the same religious background. They're both educators and very committed to education. They had the same active lifestyle. You call them on a Saturday morning and they're in the car with the kids going somewhere, doing something. There's always something going on. They both love travel in different cultures. They both are very interested in politics, and they're on the same page in terms of their politics, and they value it deeply. They also value family. They both support involvement with both of their families, and they're both involved with each other's families. They also have deep devotion to their two children. They have a belief in diversity. So they want to send their children to public schools instead of private schools, and they're looking for bilingual schools. And that is acting with that belief in diversity. She supported his giving up his steady job to start a nonprofit to promote some educational issues that he believes in, even though she had to work more. She was happy to do that. They both love socializing with friends, and they both value friendships very much, both alone and together. They love dancing and parties. They both find joy in some of the same things, like doing dance routines for TikTok or dressing up for Halloween. Their whole house is decorated for Halloween. They love it. They're on the same page in terms of how they spend their money and how they save it and how they enjoy themselves on a daily basis. Liz and Scott consider their relationship to be stable, with very little tension between them. When they do have something that bothers them, which it does, about the other, they do bring it up, but not in a nasty way. And they both feel that the other accepts what they bring up and seeks to understand why they feel the way they do, rather than simply discounting it, even if they don't agree. They talk things through until they generally reach a resolution that they can live with. They both trust each other, which also allows them to feel comfortable when the other spends time with other people without them being present. So they're not jealous, even including having lunch with someone of the opposite sex. She says that one thing she loves about him is that he's always made her feel respected. He asks and respects her opinions, even on things that he sometimes knows more about. They both stress that they are both considerate of each other. They show concern for each other when they're stressed, which they sometimes are from jobs or from their children. But they also are able to ask for what they want from each other. So they're givers and takers, both of them. Takers in a good way, asking for what they need. So I'm going to take 1 second, and are there any questions or comments about this example or about anything I've said so far? Okay.
Just waiting, Laurie, to see if anybody puts a cue into the chat here. Not seeing anything.
Okay. Okay,
Okay.
fine. We'll have more opportunity later. So let me tell you how I divided this long description of this relationship that I tried to make pretty comprehensive. So some of the things that are involved with this fit are what I call lifestyle, which I will call LS, lifestyle kind of things, and other I call emotional relationship issues. So that's ER, emotional relationship. So let me tell you what I mean by lifestyle and emotional relationship issues. So lifestyle issues, and these are not comprehensive, by the way. So they would be interests, values, family involvement with extended family, with children, value on free time and education, vacations, value on making money and career, how much, how little, what kind, desire for social connections versus not, super busy versus and active versus a value on downtime. So we think of this as similarity being good, but sometimes differences can work well in carrying out lifestyle priorities as well. So if both want to travel, but only one might be the planner. There's gender differences in household activities often and in lifestyle. So the stereotype, which I hope you don't get offended by, but it's pretty common, is that women will be more involved with the daily details of kids, their food, their education. She might cook more than the man, but not always, of course. Whereas the male partner or the other partner, if it's not an opposite sex, might take care of the furnace and the car and the yard and whatever. So I think Pete once talked about it as co-presidents of a business, where they each take different aspects of things. So interests and competence can lead to differences that work well. So what do I mean by emotional relationship issues? Well, things like intimacy, love and love languages, respect, trust, givers and takers, whether that's imbalanced or not, consideration, caring for the welfare of the other. And then there are some thorny issues sometimes. Well, if any of those issues don't go well, they're thorny, but thorny issues like control issues, confrontation, people having a hard time with the idea of confronting each other, what they bring things up with each other, what one person sees as an argument, the other sees it as an important discussion, and setting limits, things like that. So Ray Bergner did some research on love and found that the most important things in love are intimacy, trust, respect, and companionship. So some emotional relationship issues demand similarities. So it helps if they both want to talk out issues, if they both want the same amount of emotional closeness, if they both give and receive love in different ways. But some demand differences to be a good fit. So if one avoids confrontation, the other needs to be someone who doesn't avoid it, might even embrace it in order for the relationship to work well. One of my mottos, I have some mottos that I use with couples, is every couple needs a pot stirrer, someone to stir the pot. So if you have two people that are avoiders, that tends not to work well. You need at least one person to jump in and stir the pot and say, hey, this isn't going very well. Hey, we seem to be distant and or at each other lately. We need to talk about this. I once had a couple many years ago, and she came in to talk about her relationship, and they were both very nice, very polite, very reserved people who absolutely never talked about any problems at all. And she was just about ready to divorce. I think she did divorce. And the issues that they had, because everyone has issues, were just simmering right under the surface. And she was just furious and resentful, and he was too. And it was awful because neither one of them had been able to jump in and say, we better work on things. If both are depressive, that can really drag things down. Depression is hard enough anyway on a relationship, but if both people tend to be depressive, that's a problem, even more of a problem. If both are sensitive, reactive, defensive types, there's a lot of clashing. If one is strong and pushes the limits, the other needs to be able to set limits. Otherwise, they're going to get walked over. So those are some ways that I think work really well to split the kind of two different kinds of fit that are both really important in marriage. Now, we can also look at, obviously everybody doesn't have good fit in both those areas. So two common transformations, which are kind of deviations from the paradigm case that can still count as a case of good fit. So in this case, let's say Liz and Scott have really good lifestyle fit, but some emotional relationship differences in their fit. So that would be the first kind. So they both love to travel, they value close family, they support each other's careers, they both love socializing, but not as good at communication, don't feel so valued in the relationship. One wants more emotional connection than the other does. Okay, so let's look at the other transformation. They have a really good emotional relationship fit, but some differences in lifestyle. So in that case, they both talk a lot, they work out their differences really well. They treat each other with respect and trust, they're both affectionate, but they have really different interests. One loves the outdoors and hiking, the other not so physical, would rather sit home and read a book. One is a lot more social than the other. One loves travel and the other's not interested. One's more intellectual, the other not. So what is this? I was brainstorming one day to think about what are some of the issues that come up with couples that were problematic fit. And it really started because I had a young couple come in and they were getting in their late 20s and they were needing to be thinking about having kids. And she absolutely just couldn't stand the thought of having children. I don't want to be pregnant. I don't want to have children. I have no interest at all. And he came from a large, close family. His brothers and sisters were having kids. He was wanting kids and couldn't imagine a life without kids. So really, it's a deal breaker for them, right? So as I went through brainstorming, what are the types of things that come up with people, I put some stars next to things that I thought were smaller things, and I put some stars next to, 2 stars next to things that I thought were really big things, and I put stars next to that having children would definitely be, one of the huger issues, right? But then I kind of realized something. There wasn't one thing that would work for every single couple. And the reason is that it depends. It always depends. What does it depend on? Depends on the weight or value that people put on each thing. So let's take the one with children. Supposing that she said, I really don't want kids very much, but if you're really dying to have them, I guess I could consider having one. I think I can deal with one. And that might do it for him, right? Or supposing that she couldn't stand the idea of having kids and he said, I really would like kids, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I'm close to them. I spend a lot of time with them. I think that can kind of take the place. So I think I can live with not having kids. So there's the difference in weight there that might make this not a deal breaker for some other couple if the weight was different. And that is true for absolutely everything that you think about. For one couple, something can be a deal breaker, and for another, it can be, I can live with it. It's tolerable, those kind of differences. So weight or value, we find that in the judgment diagram, which I'm not going to go into now in terms of how decisions are made. And sometimes that is part of a decision whether to stay married or get a divorce, but it's everyday life as well. So I'm going to make a quick stop here to just mention there's distinction between fit and satisfaction and commitment. As I was thinking about some of these things, I realized that I was getting some of them confused a bit. So we've already looked at fit some, and fit, I think, does affect both satisfaction and commitment, but it is different than both. So I think people's satisfaction with their relationship probably tends to be better with better fit. And that depends, of course, though, each time on the value that they put on the different areas that are better or not such good fit. They might be more or less satisfied with the overall relationship. I want to mention that one major component of satisfaction is whether they like the person they are and that they want to be in this relationship. We are different with different people. And whether the partner actually likes the person that they naturally are and that they like being and want to be. So that's a huge part of satisfaction in relationships, I think, big criteria. Commitment tends to be higher with greater satisfaction and with better fit. However, this would be an interesting research to do. I wouldn't be surprised if the correlation between them isn't as high as you might expect. You ask people why they are committed to staying in this relationship, and sometimes it's for very different reasons than fit or satisfaction. They might say they don't believe in divorce. So I'm going to stay no matter what. It's a promise. Maybe it's religious. Sometimes it's family pressure to stay in. It might be because of financial issues. One or the other or both really can't make it on their own without combining their incomes. Or she might have no income. This was a long time issue as to why there was so little divorce going on in history. Women just simply couldn't make it alone. It could be fear of being alone and never finding someone else. It could be not wanting to hurt the children with divorce. None of those reasons have much to do with satisfaction or fit, but all can be really important issues that affect commitment when people are considering divorce or refusing to consider it. Okay, do we have any questions yet or comments?
Yes, we do. Joe Jeffrey has a question. So Joe, if you want to unmute and put your question.
Sure. I'm trying a new speaker. Is this working? Can everybody hear me?
I barely hear you.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Is that any better?
Nope.
Hold on a minute.
No.
And then Laurie's clock is chiming too. So
This does not want to stop. Okay.
try again, Joe.
Okay, how's this for a volume level?
Still not great. Did you want to type your question into the chat?
Is this working?
I can,
That's better.
I can hear it. Yeah.
That's better. Yep.
Okay. Well, I got problems with my internet connection is the problem apparently. So I was listening to all these things and I was thinking, what do these all add up to? All these various specifics under LS and ER, and it struck me that that fit seems to be a matter of to what extent can each of these people be who they really are in this relationship. Seems to cover all the various issues, style, interaction, relationship, how they treat each other. What do you think about that? In other words, it's a matter of, can you be who you really are?
Yeah, well, that was what I was talking about in terms of satisfaction. Can you be who you really are is a huge issue in satisfaction. If you can't be who you really are, you're going to be having to constantly change who that is.
But
And
it
then,
seems to be more than that. I'll give you a personal example. Once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, I was in a very different marriage, which ended because it became clear that I could not be who I was in that marriage because my wife at the time had nothing but contempt for all the things that I valued. So if you look at the contrast, it seems to fit more than just dissatisfying. It was, I can't be here. It's not just, it's dissatisfying to be here. It's, I can't be here. So it seems to be a broader concept.
well,
What do you think?
I think that for a lot of people, that would be the deal breaker for them. That would be I can't stay in this relationship because I can't be who I am. there are certainly couples that try really hard to fit in with what the other person wants, or who just keep struggling. In fact, I guess when I said people are who they are, no matter what, and they don't change very much. And so if the fit is bad and it's not working to be who you are in this relationship, then that is a big reason why it stays problematic, really problematic. And, depends how much you can't be who you are. I mean, everybody is irritated to some extent with their partner. One of my mottos is everyone is irritating. And if you want to know how, just ask their partner about each other, and they'll tell you a whole list of things that are irritating. So that's sort of built into marriage. But overall, it's got to be that who that person is at heart in general is someone you appreciate and really like. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm agreeing with you that is a huge part of what the fit is. Two people that appreciate and enjoy each other, the people that they feel they really are. That's a huge part of what fit is.
Okay, thanks.
And
Okay,
it affects the emotional relationship. Ian, is my picture on there now or at all?
yeah, your video, like we can see you when you're speaking. At least I can see you beside your slide
Okay, good.
as you're speaking.
There
Yeah.
on my-
All clear.
And so I just well, Wynn had a question, and when I'm going to throw to you in just a sec, if I can remind folks when they have a question, just to private message me in the chat saying, and just with the letter Q. The chat to everyone is filling up with a lot of really interesting conversation, and some, I'm simply going to put it out there that some do find that distracting. And there's no expectation that Laurie's going to be monitoring the chat that whizzes by on the everyone chat, just so you know that.
I can't actually see the chat.
Yeah, it's
Maybe it's
probably
just as well.
I find it's probably it's usually best, but I'm going to throw to Win, please.
So, I was thinking when I first saw the topic, I was thinking that that's sort of a brilliant organizational idea. Fit being being the broadest of the aesthetic categories. The concept that at least within the judgment diagram about hedonics, prudence, aesthetics, and ethics, that fit is one of the foundational ones. And as an aesthetic category, it really opens up to the whole variety of themes of what maintains or holds somebody's interest in a certain domain of truth, rigor, objectivity, beauty, elegance, those very, very broad categories. And then to go back to what Joe was just saying and what you were just describing in terms of one's being oneself, because people don't change that much. What I basically have found time and again is that the main predictor about whether something eventually will work in a troubled relationship is whether the couple can maintain an actual interest in each other's perspective, can participate in that perspective fully as themselves without having their integrity violated.
Mm-hmm.
And the range of the various things that you then described as examples of that all touch on the issues of what may or may not violate somebody's integrity. But I think that's why the concept of fit is, in some ways it's sort of too abstract, but it absolutely captures the problem.
Yeah, right. Well, some of this, what you just said might also be relevant to where I'm going with this. So why don't I continue a little bit, and sounds like there'll be a lot of discussion by the end of this. But let me continue, because I didn't want to spend too much time in between, and let's see if I cover some of the things you're talking about, Wynn, as well. So let's see. Okay, longer term relationships and fit. Why does fit sometimes change over time? It is a fascinating question, and we've actually asked it at the conference several times. When I first started thinking about this, I thought about one thing, and I've now come up with no fewer than 6. I'm very proud of myself. So what we see all the time is that people start out with what seems like initially really good fit. And then over time, it becomes more and more problematic, and suddenly, or gradually, eventually, it looks like pretty poor fit. Now, how can that happen? So here's 6 answers. In the very beginning, this may not last too long, but in the very beginning, people are on their very best behavior. Over time, the rest of them comes out. And you know what? We're not, again, I want to stress, people aren't lying. People aren't doing this on purpose. We all are crazy about each other most of the time when something starts in a really great way and we feel wonderful about ourselves and the other person looks wonderful. And yet, obviously, it just doesn't stay that way over time. So usually you have to give it a certain amount of time to really get to know someone. And I tell my clients, if you think someone's perfect, then you don't know them yet. And if you think the relationship is perfect, you don't know the relationship yet. You have to know the downside of the other person, and you have to know the downside of the relationship, and that takes time. Patterns and cycles form. It just takes a little time. But I will tell you an interesting story from Pete. I once asked him if he believed in love at first sight, and he said yes. And I'm like, what? What do you mean yes? How can that be? And he said, well, here's how it is. People see each other and they fall in love with who they think that person is. And over time, sometimes that is just who that person turns out to be. And then we call it love at first sight. He said, sometimes over time, it turns out that is not who they are. And then we say, well, it was infatuation. I thought I was in love, but no, I wasn't really. And that really makes sense. And there's a lot of stories of people that know instantly, one or the other or both know, the first night they come back from a date and say, I just met the person I'm going to marry. Lyndon Johnson said that about Lady Bird, I guess. He was very, very decisive, but he knew, and it worked, right? So that's the first thing. What we know of the other person at first is not only how they behave, but how they describe themselves. We learn more over time by their behavior. So again, I'm not talking about people lying, but there's a disconnect between, for all of us, some more, some less, but always a disconnect between how we see ourselves and how others see us. So we know ourselves from what I call the inside out. We know what's in our head. We know what we feel, what we think, what we intend, but other people cannot read our minds. They know only from our behavior. But in the beginning, we all talk about who we are. You know what? I'm really hardworking. I'm easygoing. I'm really honest. My family's important to me. Well, some of those are true, but some of them might not end up true. Again, not lies, but we just see each other differently sometime. And over time, as we see behavior, this person's behavior, we say, well, he told me he's really easygoing, but he is not. No way. Okay, number 3, we are attracted to the best of people's characteristics, and we discover the downside over time. Every characteristic has advantages and disadvantages, good things about it and bad. They come out differently with different people. They come out differently in different situations. And hey, you know what? If we're stressed, different things come out, right? So we are attracted to those best things in their characteristics. And then over time, we start to see the downside of the very same characteristics. So someone can say, wow, she is so active and energetic. That's really so cool. And over time, what's he going to say? She never stops. She's never home. She might say about him, he's such a calm, solid, reliable guy. I can really count on him. And later on, you ask her and she says, he doesn't care enough to get emotional. He's never excited. He's boring. Or here's someone that you say, he's got really strong opinions. He knows what he believes. Over time, he's self-righteous. He thinks he's always right. And finally, she's really quiet and thoughtful. I really like that about her. Later, she's distant, she's uninterested, she's into herself. So those are common kind of things that end up happening over time. Number 4, over time, our partner influences how we feel and act, and we influence how they feel and act. That is something we cannot know in the beginning, is how that will play out. So an example, supposing they're critical, so we become defensive. They're not affectionate, so we become needy. They go beyond appropriate limits and they give us reasons to mistrust. So guess what? We become jealous and controlling. So these patterns and cycles form over time. And this is systems theory, obviously, so a certain amount. So overfunction, underfunction. There was a couple that talked about how their sex life used to be terrific for a while. And then suddenly over time, she became more and more uninterested and he didn't get it. Why would that have happened? Actually, this was on a radio show. It was kind of funny. And I said, well, you know, sometimes what can happen is in the beginning, both people want sex. And so, you know, since they both want it, everybody's happy, great. And then let's say she begins to lose a little bit, you know, stop a little bit, want a little less. And he doesn't like that. So he starts really pushing harder. He wants it more. He's putting a little pressure on. And I'm not talking about rape or something, but just he wants more. And she begins to realize in the beginning, it felt like I'm just doing this because I want to. But now it feels like I can't just not do it, or I can not do it, but he's not going to like that. I didn't realize that. So one of Pete's maxims, of course, is coercion elicits resistance. So we become different when our partner changes, and they become different when we change. Okay, people's interests, values, and priorities can change over time. On the one hand, we're the same people that we are in major ways all our lives. But if we were the same people at 25 as we were at 50 or 70, that'd be pretty weird. So tell you a story. I was sitting at I think it was our 29th wedding anniversary. Ray and I were out to dinner. And I said, here's what I knew about you when we got married. And he's still the same person in so many ways as a person in general. But did I know that he was going to become crazy about soccer to the point where he couldn't sleep before soccer games? He was a volunteer for 25 years with girls and went nuts over it. And it was pretty cool, actually. Did I know that his interest in travel would get less so, was much less than I thought it was when I married him? Did he know that I was going to get crazy busy and overcommitted? No, I became a lot more committed to Jewish traditions when we had children. I wasn't all that interested when we met, but I sure got more so when I had children. I didn't know that was going to happen, and he didn't, right? So there's a certain amount of luck if the changes that occur over time still continue to have good fit between people. People can change their beliefs, their religious and political beliefs. I had a couple a while back that were in a very, very judgmental, fundamentalist religion. And she totally changed. She began to work somewhere with other people that were not in that religion. She'd always been in there, and her family had been in that, and she began to totally change, and he did not. And I got to tell you, major problems. Melinda and Jake, making up their names, they met as teenagers. And she was in love with him and just followed him, did anything he wanted. Everything he wanted was fine with her. She loved every minute of whatever. But over time, 12 years later, she had changed her political views. This small rural conservative place, they were more conservative. They didn't believe in vaccines. She became more liberal. She got vaccinated. She liked the punk music scene. And she realized she really didn't love being outside and camping and hiking, which they had done before, as much as she thought she had. So how do these priorities change? Sometimes, how do these interests change? Sometimes they just change. Sometimes we can't really say. Although it can be that being with other people than you've been with before can change it, but also priorities can change. And how can that happen? So let me tell you about a client of mine, and his name, will give him the name of Harry. And Harry had a very difficult background. His parents divorced and his father abandoned them at the time. His mother wasn't around all that much. She wasn't that involved, and she lied, drove him crazy. He just hated that she lied all the time. And so he could not rely on them. So he basically said, I brought myself up. So what did he want when he was looking for someone? He was looking for someone that he said his wife, the first thing he noticed was she had kind eyes. She's reliable. She's an honest partner. She would not lie. She's trustworthy. So that's what he got. He got a nice, faithful, trustworthy person. That's what he wanted. But guess what? He was not aware that there were other things that he wanted, and he didn't get them with her. So she didn't really get him. He is like super active, interested in everything under the sun, wants to travel, etc. And she sits home and has fewer interests and things, not the same at all. So he got what he wanted, but his priorities, he realized other things were important that he hadn't realized at the time. And finally, situations can change how a couple interacts, and different situations call for different relationships or different things in a relationship. Health and mental health changes can make a huge difference. So I had seen, I'm going to call them Fred and Martha for a while, on and off, and really their relationship, we just made lots of progress, and they were doing really, really well. And then a while later, they called me up, and she had gotten cancer, and the cancer took several years before she finally died. And they just could not get along at all. He's a worrier. He wants to help. She doesn't want the help, or, don't tell me what to do. It just, all of the old stuff just came back again. And it really was only because of the cancer, because they had been doing great. I had a friend who was married to an older guy who got Parkinson's, and she couldn't handle it all. And they had a very good relationship till then, and she simply couldn't handle it. Kids being born, that changes things. It brings out differences if there are some. If there's a huge amount of involvement with the kids, if only one is involved, that can be a problem. Or are they both going to be involved? Different views of discipline. Problematic kids definitely can bring out all the differences. When the kids leave home, it can make a difference. If one has an affair, that can change the relationship over time. Involvement of couples' parents. There's so many things that can change relationships when situations change. So I had a friend actually who was she and her husband were getting ready for retirement. And she said, our idea of retirement seems to be pretty different. So what did she want? She wanted a house in the country with a horse. And he wanted to move to New York and be in theater. Couldn't have been more different. And that was a relationship that couldn't survive that kind of a difference. So let's talk about compensating for lack of fit. Interesting question. What can compensate for lack of lifestyle fit, and what can compensate for lack of emotional relationship fit? And I think, first of all, that each of them, if it's strong in one of those areas, stronger, that can help if it's not as strong in the other. Each of them can compensate for what might be missing in the other part. So a more emotionally satisfying relationship can help compensate for a lack of lifestyle. And a better emotional relationship might compensate for some, depending on what kind and how much, less emotionally satisfying relationship. But some area has to be satisfying, I think, to a certain point. So what can compensate for a lack of lifestyle fit? I think one thing that comes to my mind that's really important is tolerating independence for both of them. If I love to hike and I love to travel, and let's say my husband doesn't, allowing each other independence to do those things, that I can do those things even if he doesn't like it, can just make a big difference. If he wants to spend his time reading or going into work or whatever, that will work if I say, fine, go right ahead. I'll do other things and I'm going to give you that time. So those kind of independence, I think, is hugely important, so that people don't end up giving up. And some people will say that, well, I guess I'd like to do this, but I can't do it because my spouse doesn't like to do it. And I'm like, what? That doesn't mean you can't do it. Like, work that out, right? I just had someone the other day, they're going to be going to Charleston, and he said, well, I said, there's this great museum there, this slave auction museum, you'd love it. And he said, well, my husband, that won't happen. My wife would never do that. And I said, so what? Well, she likes to shop. I said, great, tell her to shop for a couple of hours while you see this museum for a couple of hours, like, right? That's how it works. And he's like, hadn't occurred to him, right? Another thing, obviously, is a certain amount of compromise that people do. And finally, a desire to share that leads to some compromise and leads to saying, we'll do some things, some. I don't believe it being joined at the hip, but neither do I believe in that it's good for couples to do nothing together, to have distant parallel existences, right? So what can compensate for lack of emotional relationship fit? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is if both have an openness and a competence to negotiate and talk and resolve issues. And that's one of the biggest problems that people tend to come in with, is that they are not open to it, or they're just not good at it. And most people, I have discovered, come from families that didn't talk things out, didn't know how to deal with anger and resolve issues, or at least resolve them enough you can tolerate them. And so they don't know how to do it. They don't have models. And when you have both people that don't, you've got some problems. So competence helps, and sometimes that's an important thing of what we do in marital therapy. And openness to talking is really important. Some people think it's not a good thing to talk. That's not going to work. The second thing, that there's enough of emotional relationship strengths to compensate for those that are lacking. I'll tell you a story about David that I knew years ago. And he said, my first wife and I divorced, and she had an affair. He said, it wasn't the affair actually that did us in. We actually tried. We went to counseling, we tried. But here's the thing, before the affair, our relationship wasn't that great. But we had one thing, and that was trust. And once she had the affair, the trust was hurt. And so there wasn't enough left after that. So I think that's a great example. Even if there's not good sex sometimes, if there's trust, if there's respect, etc., and true caring, that can make a huge difference. Ability to consider one's own issues, one's own part in problems. And I will tell you that I think this is essential for couples working out. When I have couples that come in and one of them is just, I had one guy say, well, I know it's always 50-50, and it is, but really, and then he just gave me this whole long list of things that were her problems. So when people can consider their own issues, it makes a huge difference. And I've noticed it too in affairs, that sometimes people come in, and most people think if there's an affair, that's the end of it. I would leave that person, or the other person would leave me. But a lot of people, most people really don't actually. They're fighting for it. But the best situations tend to be if the other person comes in and says, okay, I am really incredibly upset and disappointed and devastated by this. However, I know that I had something to do with why my partner was vulnerable to an affair. I wasn't paying much attention. I wasn't giving much affection, whatever. And I have to look at myself here. So that and that takes some of the anger out, and it makes a huge difference in being able to negotiate that issue. And then, of course, love and commitment to each other. Love and commitment overcome a lot of other problems. People can live with a lot of things missing if there's true love on both sides. And I do believe in that, and I do see it. And I tell people that sometimes. This is a gift you have, and I do see couples that don't have that. So when you do, it makes a huge difference. Okay. Here's my final thing here. Using the concept of fit in clinical work with couples. This has been so useful, I think. First of all, when you talk about the lack of fit, it helps to lessen the anger and the blame toward the other partner. There's nothing wrong with either of us. Helps, number two, it helps each feel better about their own selves. It's not my failure. This is just a bad fit. So it can help take away anger and blame and feeling like it's either person's fault. It takes away this sense of fault. It also can help form more realistic expectations from the relationship. Is it worth working on or not? Sometimes I see people, I'll give you an example of a very, very strong, overwhelming personality with a much quieter personality. And that quieter person feels like they cannot be themselves and they can't be heard. And they have a terrible time opening up and just saying what they want or what they think. And they just don't feel, it kind of goes back to maybe to Joe's, you can't be who you really are here. And it's that kind of situation is very hard to overtake and overcome. And even if you try, even if that strong person tries, a lot of times they kind of can't help it. It's just who they are, to calm down and not be so powerful. And so recognizing that can help some realistic expectations and whether it's worth it or not to continue working on it. It might help accept differences in people. A lot of personality differences and also male-female differences are really common. I once had a woman tell me that we were talking about it, and she said, talking about these male-female, I was actually doing a radio show on male-female differences and how women like to talk about relationships and feelings, and men tend not to do that as much. And she said, this is very helpful because I had a good woman friend and she was a great person and I was so close to her and she moved away. So I decided my husband's going to be my new best friend. And I turned to him for all this and it just wasn't working. And I realize now he's not the same person and he's a man. He's not going to enjoy and be able to talk in the same way. It's not fair to even expect it. So that was really helpful. And it might help with the decision about whether or not to divorce. And finally, it helps people learn from bad relationships how to better judge a partner for the next relationship, know what to look for. So I often say, if a relationship is breaking up, you should learn two things. And the first is, what was it about this person that didn't work for me? What do I need to be different here? So you don't want to end up basically choosing the same issues, same type of person that gave you problems in the first place, right? So those are some different things. So we're at the very end. So I'm back to my question from the start. If they were such a perfect fit, these slippers, why did one come off? And I have an answer for you. That's an easy one. They weren't a perfect fit. So that's it, folks. That's all. Now let's see if I can come back here. Aha, I am. Good.
And we're back. Thank you for that, Laurie. And I believe that Joe was next with a comment on commitment. Joe, if you want to go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Hap put in the chat. I thought she was footloose. Hap, I had no idea that you were so good with puns.
And that's a shame. Oh well. So Joe's having trouble unmuting.
You could write your question in the chat, although it's not the same as.
Yeah, and I can't unmute you, Joe. I can only ask you to unmute, which I think is salt in the wound. So I'm gonna see if anybody else has a question. You can simply put Q into the.
I successfully unmuted.
Oh, there we are. Yep.
Okay.
There's Joe.
A small comment. I was a little troubled by your discussion of commitment. It struck me that it's a different thing to be committed either to the person or the relationship than it is to have strong reasons. And the religious example, I think, is a good one. A couple who wants to stay together because their religion says you must stay together is not necessarily committed to the relationship. Being committed, seems to me, means you want to, rather than I have reason to. So if you refine that, you might get a little more insight into fair number of people, from what little I can tell, are together because they have to be, not, and that's quite different from we're committed to it.
Or they think they have to be.
Well, yeah, and they're, they consider themselves to have to be, whichever way.
Yes, can you make a difference between the commitment to the relationship versus commitment to the marriage? Would that make a difference too?
Well, I wouldn't, because, well, I guess in a way, I only think about it. Well, marriage isn't like different relationships are different. And a marriage is a particular sort of relationship.
It's also an
In
institution.
certain ways, and you could really want to be in that specific relationship. So I guess that's how I would distinguish it.
Win. Yep. Go ahead, Win. Oh,
Jane,
Well, if one distinction that I think you're getting at, Joe, is that you can be committed to the institution of marriage as prescribed by the religion without being particularly committed to the nature, to the I-thou relationship. And I think a feature that I think is somewhat missing in this is that recognition of the relationship that that has a kind of I-thou quality. In contrast to that, I'm doing this because we're locked in the same damn cell, we're financially obligated. Your papa is going to kill me, I won't get the inheritance. There's all sorts of institutional reasons. But particularly when you go to something like that, I can't divorce, that when you go to an institutional explanation, it may violate I think it's maybe the point that you're after, which is it's not my love for you that's really here.
right.
It's that God makes me do it. Or in my case, the devil made me do it, because
Yeah.
So we have, I think, a comment or a question from Corey Johansson.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I thought I was sending this to everyone. It was just a comment on the commitment, the lifestyle commitment. I think if it were two people agreeing that their commitment to, say, like a God, I would say I'm wondering if that's what you would consider a good fit, if these two have that in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think values, a commitment to values is definitely there. And I think sometimes some of those religious ones, or the vow of marriage, if both people, I mean, that is absolutely part of a good fit, I think, is different kinds of values. Yeah.
And so I just, there's I think a new feature of Zoom with which I wasn't familiar. So I recognize a hand raised and I have an option to invite. So I'm going to click on it now and see what happens. Probably nothing terrible.
Good. That's me. I was the one who asked.
That's you, Julia.
Yeah. I think one of the points that you talked around, and I saw quite a lot of comments in the chat room, was that we have certain perceptions of who we are and how wonderful, the wonderful, the good qualities that we have. And I think part of fit is that the person that we choose or the person that we are with recognizes those qualities and thinks they're equally wonderful. So sort of reinforces just what we think of ourselves. I was in a relationship at one point where one of the things I feel good about is that I can talk to people and make them feel comfortable and bring them out. And we had gone to a friend of his who was talking about his mother, and I innocently asked, was his father had died, was his mother dating? Later, this friend said to him, your girlfriend asked the most embarrassing, intimate questions. And suddenly he said to me, you asked too many questions. You should never do that. And it ruined the relationship. I suddenly felt I had to be a pretzel. But I think when the partner sees in you what you see in yourself and think is wonderful, that's part of being a great fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back, I mean, I guess I called it satisfaction, but it is a core part. And I think that's what Joe Jeffrey talked about early on as well, that is a core part of a good fit, that people truly enjoy and appreciate that person that you feel you really are and that you want to be, the best part of yourself. If you're a question person and people love it that you are a question person, that's great. If someone says that's, you ask too many questions, well, then you feel like you have to muzzle yourself and you don't want to. It's awful actually when people get critical feedback from the other person over something that they just feel is who they are. Absolutely. CJ, I think, has a raised hand here.
Oh, okay. I could not see that. Go ahead, please.
Well, it's kind of a crazy idea, but it's like the idea of fit among very different people in couples speaks to me reminds me of the functional as well as emotional context of couples. Like, what are they trying to do together? And what do they bring to it that allows them to get more done together and more, whatever, progress, satisfaction, whatever, together than they could have apart. And it's a very simplified example. What Laurie talked about reminded me of the contrast in healthcare between physicians and administrators. Now, this is a classic example of conflictual relationships because they're so different. But they're both committed to the institution of healthcare and taking care of patients and everything. But they often don't have a complementary relationship. They can't get divorced. And often think of each, like, for example, doctors often say, why can't administrators be more like doctors? And yet if they were, it would ruin everything. And I wonder, in couples, is there a sense like that people need to appreciate and savor their differences and actually spell them out and understand them? So, like letting each other be who you really are and knowing what that is, being able to put words on it and see how that makes your couple more than what you would have had without them. And the other part of it is sort of like, when you think about what individuals are good at, it's like in this administrator physician thing, we talk about staying in your professional zone and out of your amateur zone. And in couples, it's like that. It seems like I know where my professional zone is in my marriage, and I know where my amateur zone picks up. And I kind of rely on Peggy. Like, I know, okay, she's going to be good at this. And I might not really understand it, but I know that she has to do this. She's going to be better at this. Anyway, so anyway, that was just an example it reminded me of. That's all.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this concept of synergy that I mentioned, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about. And the question of how, that is a core question, is how the two differences can work out well together versus how they end up being seen as deficits and problematic. And so sometimes, and it's interesting that as I said, the very things that people start with thinking it's great end up being something that they no longer think is great. They think now is a deficit, differences become deficits. So how do you, I mean, I think one of the things, maybe Lane has something to say about this too for marital therapy, but I think it is one of the things we try to do is help that happen, get back to that, you know, where did it go wrong and why do they no longer have that sense anymore? And, you know, do people, for instance, you know, there are people that get defensive if the other person is good at something they're not, and they think, you know, what are their expectations of themselves? And you know, so there's a lot of work to be done around that. Absolutely.
Okay, and I've got Walter next and then Joe.
One, I think, fascinating phenomenon that probably exists more today than in the past, that I think is especially fascinating to do post-mortems on, is gray divorce. People who are divorcing after 40 years of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be fascinating to look at all of these dimensions throughout the course and to see what it was that was holding what perhaps ought not to have been held. I just had a conversation yesterday with someone who sees himself as being in a troubled marriage, his wife perhaps less so, but he brought up, he said, this was maybe 30 years ago, that he said to her, my goodness, the wonder of flight and seeing a bird alight. And she said, it has wings. And he set out to address what it was that she wasn't getting, and has been doing that for 30 years. But it has only recently come to the recognition that no, it has wings is as far as she goes. And that she can't join him in the wonder experience.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm just bringing that up. I mean, it kept resonating for me that he said this, that this had happened 30 years ago. He said it to me and it was like, kapow, you know. But, you know, he kept going at trying to engineer a change, and only recently has come to terms that the recognition that she only sees it has wings is associated with other deficits that you know are other deficits for him anyway, and in the relationship that could do it, you know, that could make it terminal.
Yeah, or not. I mean, that's the decision he's got to make. But understanding who people are and what those restrictions are in the people and then in the relationship, and making a decision. Then, I mean, as I say, you can make a certain amount of change, and there's a certain amount you can't make in relationships. So you know, oh, I just lost what I was going to say. This guy, yeah, this client that I have, that he was quite fascinated with all of this, and he said he actually drew a chart that I haven't shown yet. But anyway, he said, you know, when I first knew my wife, when we were younger, I worked, I had college, you know, I was involved with all sorts of things, and the amount of overlap of the time we had together was very small, actually, when we first got together. And as I said, this is the one that looked for the kind eyes, and he thought he had what he needed. And then kids came along, and, you know, this is like an old story, right? We've heard this so many times, right? So kids come along and she's involved with the kids, and he's somewhat involved with the kids, but he's the main breadwinner. He's working really hard. And there's only so much overlap between the two of them. Well, now the kids are gone, and here's the empty nesters, right? And he is still working. So that is true. But it took him a long time to, the deficits that she has, and that he just will not he knows she just cannot join him in so many things, but he continues to stay with her because I think he just doesn't want to go through divorce, I guess, and because she is a kind person. I mean, that's the thing is he looks at this balance, and that's the question: is there enough of the good stuff that, but accepting, taking a look at what this person is not going to have for you and accepting it is the question, or not, or making a decision. That's where the judgment diagram comes in, and the weights that people put on different things. But it's all that time together where the deficits in the relationship show up when they did not before as much.
Sounds okay. I'm going to pass to Joe, and then Wynn, and then Julie. Julie, I think we will have time, and then if we do have time, it'll be Sonia.
I just wanted to make a small comment, piggybacking on what CJ said. I love the example of the doctor and the administrator. I think mutual appreciation is hugely important, given that there are always going to be differences.
Mm-hmm.
As a first-hand example, my wife Carol absolutely loves and is fascinated with quilts. I just don't care about them. They're just odd pieces of cloth. But I see the point of her interests. I understand how she can be turned on by that. And I love that she is turned on by that.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, I went with her, has to do with compromise. Pardon me, I went with her to the Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky, and was, by the way, blown completely out of the water by what quilts can be. Side benefit for me. On the other hand, I spend a lot of time doing hard math and physics and quantum field theory and stuff like that, because I just like it. Well, she doesn't do math, but she appreciates that I like it. She sees the point of doing it. She likes that I get the enjoyment out of it. She gets a lot of satisfaction out of that. So although each of us, in terms of pure interests, are like this, we don't even overlap in some things. Nevertheless, the mutual appreciation of the other's interests and the role that interest has in each other's lives is hugely important, much like the doctor and the administrator.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, I think it goes back to the stuff I was talking about with how one part can compensate for another, and how do you compensate for lifestyle differences? How do you compensate for emotional relationship differences? This is probably a good example of maybe a lifestyle difference, I would call it. I'm not sure these are the greatest categories, but that's what kind of somewhat worked for me. So maybe a lifestyle difference in that it's an interest that are different. And so how do you compensate for that? Well, you say, well, I'm going to compromise, or, and decision to share. I want to share even if I'm not interested. So I'm going to make that decision to go there, even though I don't think I have any interest. So that's one thing in terms of that. But the other thing is, I would also say that it's a reflection of the good emotional relationship that you have with her, that you want to be interested, you want to support her. That's an emotional relationship part to that example that compensates for the lifestyle difference that there is in the interests of quilting. Does that make some sense?
That's me, yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then Wynn.
So, I was thinking about this question from a pure pre-empirical descriptive psychological perspective. And the judgment diagram, which has been referred to now with some frequency, is a really useful tool for doing a sort of status dynamic analysis of overall circumstances over time. We think about the judgment diagram as, as having small circumstances which provide a reason, and that reason carries a weight. But these weights themselves can also be redescribed in terms of the dynamics, the status dynamics. And one way of sort of raising some of these questions, again, from a pre-empirical mapping, is to think about hedonic, prudent, moral, ethical, and aesthetic perspectives as functioning independently, complementary, and facilitating or conflicting and inhibiting, and or interdependently. And I wonder to what extent, because I use that kind of model frequently in marriage work when people are negotiating, which is, are these themes actually complementary? Are they antagonistic? Do they really inhibit? Do they facilitate? And all of the perspectives sort of come in. But what you're coming down to in terms of, I think, the conclusion of your talk is that the net of what is actually involved is because you're dealing with two people, does the dynamic in net fit? And so I think in some ways, you've been providing lots and lots of empirical examples, but these empirical examples, should have a pre-empirical position using the tools of, you talk about degradation ceremonies and accreditation ceremonies using this. The relationship and relationship change formulas are, perfectly suitable for this kind of work. And I think the judgment diagram allows us to map it. And using the examples that you've used, what you've done is, I think you've beautifully described the status dynamics that go into that decision of what is the nature of this marriage. And I think that was very elegantly done as you presented the examples. I think they're very helpful.
Yeah, right. We could consider this. We could continue this and put some of these, but I like the things you're adding to this very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to move on to Julie now.
Yeah, I have a very dear friend that I've known and been close with for over 4 decades. And about 7 years ago, she met a guy on the internet, and she is independently wealthy and has been successful in taking over her father's business. She's sophisticated. We went to opera and theater together. She reads, she's smart, she's social. And she met a guy who was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in a friend's apartment. That was his life. He's not particularly bright. Socially, they would go out to dinner, and because he has no money, when the waiter put down the check on a table when they were with another couple, he would look in every direction other than at the check so that the other guy would have to pick up the check. And I could not understand why she stayed with him. And I tolerated him, but never found him particularly interesting. Well, after 7 years, she decided she wanted to get married, and they asked me to be the officiant. So I had to put together you can do this on the internet. So I put together the agenda and the speech. And in doing so, I sent them out a questionnaire. And one of the questions I asked was, what has your partner done to enhance your life? Why are you getting married? I knew from her, she had been very insecure in spite of the fact that she looked secure. She was afraid that she would say something stupid when she went out. She was afraid of reaching out to friends. And he gave her the ability to reach out, not to be afraid anymore. But I still could not understand what was she bringing to him? Yes, a wonderful lifestyle, money. So I asked him, what has this woman done? How has your life changed? How has it been better? And he said, before I was single, and now I'm going to be married, which is typical of the kind of answers he would give. But as I plumbed a little more, I realized that emotionally, he really never had somebody to stay and love and be committed to him. And that was so important. And she getting from him the kind of confidence that she never had was terribly important. And all of a sudden, in spite of the differences in their socioeconomic statuses, I understood what they were bringing to each other. So I guess that kind of reinforces the emotional underpinnings of a relationship that you may not even see that makes a good fit.
Mhm.
Well, side comment, that sounds like a good novel or something, Julie. That's quite,
It's been an ongoing saga.
quite compelling. I'm
I've
gonna,
been her confidant.
Laurie, we're running short on time, so I'd like to throw to a couple other people, if that's okay with you. I'd like to go to Sonia, and then Catherine, and then probably we'll have to cut off there. But let's see what we can do here. Sonia, take it away.
I took my hand back down. Actually, my comment doesn't fit anymore. It was a response to when Walter was talking about the gray divorce, and I was going to talk about a certain number of couples that I've encountered who are into their retirement years and have just the opposite kind of experience, and that is finding out after all those years of kind of being distracted by their lives and kids and whatever, finding out what it was that brought them together in the first place. And that's a more positive kind of notion of that. The other thing that I'll throw out there, but I won't go into it because I think all of you are, or most of you are aware of it, probably the number one most useful thing that I learned from Pete with couples is to help them understand the notion of symmetry. That what goes on one side of the relationship has an effect on the other side. And once they can really start to get a grasp of or an understanding of the symmetry in their own relationships, they understand the fit.
Yeah. Is that connected then, or the same thing as cycles and patterns that they end up having?
The cycles?
Yeah, cycles that people fall into.
Well, it could, or
They
just,
each affect each other. Systems theory and
well,
each affect
the
the
horrible example of symmetry is when somebody comes in and they're a doormat. And usually the other side of the relationship is the steamroller. And so that helps diagnose a relationship going poorly. But the notion of symmetry, I think, kind of applies throughout a relationship, and it's such a good starting point when I'm trying to help people understand the relationship history, where it is now, and where it can go.
Yeah, very much so. And I agree with you that the gray, the retirement years or whatever that comes up, sometimes it's better and sometimes it isn't as good. It depends on the couple and what they had to start, but without that distraction and with more time together. And Catherine Johnston mentioned the pandemic togetherness, which also has caused some problems for people individually and as couples, but some people have enjoyed it as well. Same thing. It depends on the couple, right?
Yes, yeah. There's a great New Yorker cartoon with a couple sitting on a bench, and the one turning to the other and saying, "So after the pandemic, we're still going to spend every waking moment together, right?" And that can certainly, as you say, Laurie, cut two different ways. I'm going to throw to Catherine for the last question within time, and then we'll see where we're at. I think it was Catherine.
Yeah. I've been noticing just in the past maybe 3 days, I've had 3 couples for whom spending all their time together and not having the ability to do things with other people much has been problematic. And that's because of the pandemic. And then today, the last person I talked to was, she's been sounding like she wanted to leave her husband, who she's been with for 10 years, but she hasn't had the official Bengali wedding yet. He's Bengali, she's not. They were going to get married and have, the big wedding a long time ago, and they postponed it twice. And then they're supposed to have this big wedding in May. And she just can't stand his politics anymore. And she said she can't watch a show without him commenting on, you know, how, you know, he doesn't like wokeness, and, you know, he's very conservative and she's the opposite. And yet they met at a social justice conference or something 10 years ago. And so she's really struggling. And when she was away from him for a week, and she was much happier. And she said she just lost the impending dread feeling that she had when she was with him, and really enjoyed her time. And I'm like, well, yeah, this is something that seems to be growing, you know, but she doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And, you know, I mean, there's all this other stuff involved, which I guess there always is. But I think the togetherness has been too much for her also.
I think it's difficult. I really believe that couples and families really depend on structure, and they depend on breaks from each other. And people often do much better when they're working and going to school. And, you know, sometimes vacations are difficult for people. It's actually on that list of crises, and the different list, that list of crises and the numbers that for each thing. And some of them are vacations can be a problem for people, stresses. But yeah, I think we all do better actually with some breaks, and trying to be together all the time is not so helpful for most people, actually. And it can bring out all the problems, more problems. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Laurie, for that. We're at the end of the official time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now, and thank our speaker, our president, Laurie Bergner, for a fascinating talk that's provoked a lot of discussion in the video, and also on in the chat as well. It's been going. It's been running pretty hard and fast. But thank you very much, Laurie. Sometimes people like to hang out at the end, but I'm going to stop the recording now, everyone.